Well, good morning, welcome, and I should say happy birthday. I'm Sarah Wollaston, I'm the Chair of NHS Devon, and I'm really delighted to welcome everyone here today and everyone joining us online. So we're going to have a very special section of this board later on to recognise a very special anniversary, but I'm just going to start off with some formalities, if I may. So first of all, that we have apologies from Liz Davenport, from Tracy Lee, Kate Shields and Sheena Asthana, and welcome to those joining us via Teams as well. Richard Schofield, Director of Strategic Transformation and Locality Director, attending on behalf of Martin Wilkinson and Mark Cook, and also Matthew Bossoy-Cook, who's Health Education Southwest Leadership Fellow and Neurosurgery Registrar at the University Hospital of Plymouth. You're both very welcome. Thank you very much. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to give our thanks as a whole board to Tracy Lee, who has been our local authority partner member. Tracy's been a fantastic member of this board, a really valued member of the team, and I'd just like to thank her for all that she has given. There is now a process in place for a new partner member to be joining us, so we will look forward to welcoming them when they arrive. And I'd also like to acknowledge and say a special thanks to Anne Cooper, as this is her last board meeting with us today. Anne has joined us and really been an incredible support to the governance team, and I'd like to thank you, Anne, for everything that you have done and wish you well. So that's great. So later today, we will be meeting in private, and in that time we'll be taking items around organisational change, the Devon operating model, our joint Peninsula Strategic Commissioning Committee, and of course these items will then come to a public board in the future. I've got a couple of members of the committee may need to briefly step out during the meeting later on, but will then be returning. So I'd like to also then come to the item on declarations of interest. And could I ask if there's anybody here who would like to update or amend their declarations of interest? No? And can I ask for your approval, please, for the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 3rd of May? Does anyone have any comments that they would like to add? And before we move on to our celebration, I'd also like to particularly welcome that we have Lee Mansfield joining us, but I know that this is going to be an introduction that we're going to hear more about your role later on from Katie, but thank you very much. I wanted to say thank you for joining us in person today. So just moving on to this section, today is an extraordinarily important anniversary, and I've been asked just to share some personal reflections. So I'd like to really start by saying thank you to the NHS for saving my life, quite literally, just down the road from here, on the day that my daughter was born. Over the ages, countless women have died in childbirth as a result of placenta previa, and they still do in some countries where they don't have access to modern obstetrics. But thanks to the team that looked after us so well in advance of that and on the day, she survived, and in fact she's now a doctor herself and hopes to be joining the staff in the NHS in the next month. But in advance of that, she'll also be running her first ultra-marathon at the weekend, and that really wouldn't have been possible without the orthopaedic team at Torbay Hospital, who pieced her leg back together after a very complicated fracture dislocation. And I say these things really because I think I hear these stories everywhere I go about the everyday miracles that are performed around the NHS, and people tell me their stories, which are very powerful and moving. And so there's absolutely nothing ordinary about those everyday miracles and I want to say thank you to the teams and the people that make that possible. Because I'm afraid we do hear noises of people saying, should we change to a different funding model? Is the NHS, can it cope? But I would say I think that is, as we know, one of the things that makes us most proud to be British is our NHS, and that underpinning principle that it provides free healthcare for everyone based on need and not ability to pay is really powerful and I think extraordinarily precious. But I would also want to acknowledge that we know there are issues, and here in Devon we have one of the most challenged health systems in the country, and as a board I know that we are incredibly mindful of that and the importance of turning around some of the performance issues that have been a challenge in this part of the world for many years. But we do that alongside our teams and recognising the extraordinary pressures that our workforce are under at the moment, and the importance for us as a board that we do everything that we can to support them, and not just about the NHS teams, but about all of our wider teams around the county, those people, the miracle workers in public health who have underpinned the 13-year increase in life expectancy that we've seen since the start of the NHS, all the carers, the people who are working in social care, all of those around the county that are working in our local authorities and alongside us, and our voluntary sector. And so I just wanted to extend my very personal thanks to everyone who makes this possible. And so happy birthday, NHS, and here's to the next 75 years. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Katie, and thank you very much, Katie, for the work that you and your team have put into this.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me today. I'm here with my colleague Steve Clark, and we're going to talk about NHS 75 in Devon. Now, I know this meeting space is quite often a space for scrutiny and challenge, but today, for the next 30 minutes, we're just going to try and use it for an opportunity for celebration and optimism for the future. Although it is hard in the NHS at times, we must remember there are thousands of positive interactions in the NHS every day, and we're here today to celebrate that. We'll be having a look back through the last few years through the eyes of our staff, but also hearing their hopes for the future. Now, I know you usually start this meeting with a patient story, but today we're going to start with a staff story instead, as part of the NHS celebrations and the opportunity to acknowledge our wonderful colleagues. And we can't celebrate the last 75 years without looking back at our very recent history and acknowledging the COVID-19 pandemic. The South West has consistently had the highest vaccination uptake in the country for the last 2 years. And I'd like to introduce Lee Mansfield, who's the Programme Director for Vaccination Services at the RDUH and has responsibility for the biggest vaccination sites in Devon. She's worked for the NHS for 28 years, and she's going to tell us her staff story today. So thank you, Lee. So could you just start by saying when and why you joined the NHS?
Thanks, Katie. Yes, so I am a physio by background, so flying the flag for allied health professionals. And as a teenager, I was quite sporty and spent pretty much most of my downtime on a rehab couch, having sustained one type of injury or another. So it was quite an easy choice for me post A-levels to go to physio school, which I did in Birmingham. And then from there, my first job was in Worcester, and did my rotational grades through the NHS, primarily in the Midlands at that point.
Great. What was your career path at the start, and what was it like working in the NHS then?
So I was pretty sure, given the route into physio school, that I would be very much musculoskeletal, very sports orientated, and quite happy to say quite naive on all of the other areas that were going to be open to me. And yet from the first day of setting foot on intensive care, I knew that was the place for me. So my path totally changed. It became very, very acute. In fact, to be fair, the more the acuity, the better for me. The more crazy the pace, the better, which is probably how the vaccination service floated my boat as well. And so from that point, it was all respiratory care, and then moved up to the northeast, and it just became more and more specialised, and was able to tap into informing some national guidelines, work with British Thoracic Society, a little bit with the Department of Health for contingency planning for bird flu, which I think a lot of those plans were part of what formed our contingency planning for where we were with the COVID pandemic as well.
Brilliant. So how does working in the NHS in Devon compare with working in the NHS in a large city?
Yeah, it was really different. I'll be really honest. We relocated here when my husband got his job over the road, and I had to look at where Exeter was on a map. I hadn't been here. He was doing a fellowship at UHP at that point in time. And I was really surprised excuse me, really surprised. So I'd come from a really big city where 7, 8, even 9 sort of district general hospitals within 20-mile radius, to coming here and just being blown away by the challenges that the demographic and the geography gave, and at that point wanted to understand more, so opted to really go out of my comfort zone and look at working in the community and trying to understand that a little bit more, so I could then kind of wear both very acute but very community focused hats going forward at this point in time, all still as a physio.
Brilliant. So what has been your proudest moments from your time in the NHS and from the role that you hold now?
Oh, I think there are so many to choose from. I think generally lumping the clinical proud moments together are when you see people who are genuinely fighting for their life on intensive care and you don't think that they're going to make it, and yet still attached to a ventilator, you manage to get them to take their first steps. I've put people on an exercise bike attached to a ventilator. So it's that sort of collaborative team working that gets the patient able to do that, and I just love that and I still miss that. The more recent is obviously the vaccination programme, and just what we were able to achieve and still do, not really knowing what we were doing at the time, and the fact that it was just such an unknown entity of trying to get everybody to work in a really different way at such a crazy pace to deliver what we had to do.
And what have you been responsible for in your current role as the vaccination service?
So my role's expanded as the programme's expanded. So when I first took up the post at the end of 2020, it was purely sort of under an RD&E footprint at the time. Now, Royal Devon provides the vaccination services for Eastern Services, for Northern Services, and also for Plymouth and West Devon as well. So, we manage and facilitate vaccinations out of all 3 mass vaccination sites, and have also supported the asylum programme, diphtheria programme, the MPOX programme. So, it's expanded a little bit from that first few weeks and months.
And how's it been working? I know there's been an army of volunteers involved. How's it been working with volunteers?
So the volunteers have been just phenomenal, and as much as the pace has been obviously really quite extreme, but without the volunteers we couldn't have done any of that. We've got our own NHS 75 event at the vaccination centres for the volunteers for exactly that reason, just to celebrate them. They have come out and gone above and beyond in all weathers, rain, shine, extreme heat, and they've been literally washed away in car parks trying to park thousands of cars. So at the peak of the programme, Christmas 21, I think both Eastern and Western sites did in excess of 4,000 vaccinations in a day, and without an absolute army of volunteers to coordinate that, it wouldn't have been possible.
That's amazing, amazing. What do you think we've learned from the pandemic?
Oh, I think we've learned a lot. I think there's a lot to capture. So, nutshell, I think it's just that we can work differently. We can do things in a different way, accepting that we had a slightly different mandate to be able to do that, but we can think outside the box, we can surprise ourselves, and we can do things at just such a with phenomenal ability to implement things that are different, and we're stronger together with the more networking and collaboration that we do to achieve that.
Brilliant, I love that. And what are your hopes for the future of the NHS?
In a nutshell, I think we have to capture a lot of the learning that we have gained from the pandemic, and I do think it would be a real shame not to do that. I think there's probably a balance somewhere between the 2 extremes of how we worked and how we had to work during the pandemic. Probably the middle ground is what I would like to see. I think not being frightened to do things differently, not being frightened of significant change, and we can do things quicker than we realise. It's about being innovative, it's about being a little bit smarter, and I think we've just got to change our narrative a little bit, to not be that work harder, just be a bit cleverer with how we do it and think more laterally, because everything and anything is possible.
Yeah, And you've proved that. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you very much for coming and joining us today. I know you've had an incredibly early start juggling your huge role, but yeah, much appreciated, and enjoy your celebrations with your wonderful volunteers. Thank you. So I just wanted to continue to look at what we've been doing to celebrate the NHS 75 in Devon. So in June, we started publishing one story and fact a day on our website and across our social media, and I'm going to talk to you, give a couple of examples shortly. And we've also got 10 individuals going to the Westminster Multi-Faith Service today up in Westminster. They were nominated by their executive directors in recognition of their dedication and support throughout their careers. So I hope they're having a wonderful time up there today. We've also obviously had a lot of media interest in the NHS today. We've had ITV West Country at Torbay Hospital to film with Lottie Bryan-Edmonds, who's their honorary director, about her fundraising campaigns. DPT have hosted an interview with Dr. Owens, who was talking about the changes in mental health over the last few years. BBC Radio Devon have also been with DPT looking at their new Leaf, which is a vocational rehab service in Exeter. And Radio Devon, I don't know if any of you have caught it, have been broadcasting live since 6 a.m. from the main entrance of Torbay, and they'll be at their acute medical unit tonight for Spotlight. As part of that package of filming, they've had a tour of the tech lab, and they've interviewed the digital fellow to talk about how different careers might be in the future for the NHS. They've also filmed with an MS consultant and a patient to illustrate how they're using augmented reality now to care for people. And it's going to culminate tonight, the Spotlight coverage, with a live panel from Torbay Hospital featuring Matt Fawkes, who's a consultant at Torbay, Healthwatch Devon, and our own Sarah Williston will be live on Spotlight tonight. So I just wanted to give a quick illustration of some of the staff stories that we've uncovered as part of our NHS 75 campaign, and I really want to thank those staff for taking part, and just here are a couple of examples. So this is Akiko, who started her career in the private sector working in R&D for a pharmaceutical company, but she realised that that career wasn't for her and joined the NHS 20 years ago in 2003. She's worked in commissioning for the last 4 years, and as part of her story she highlighted how she now knows that health is affected by all aspects of people's lives, and she understands that mental and physical health are very interlinked, and her hopes for the future is that people have more timely access to the NHS, and we embrace advances in technology. And then this is our staff story today. It's actually obviously a retired member of staff. This is Barbara Shute, who's now in her 90s, and she was a nurse down at Torbay. She grew up in Torquay and began her career as a cadet nurse at Bovey Tracy Hospital and did her student nursing years at Newton Abbot Hospital. And then she began studying and working in the NHS when it began in 1948. She says she remembers having a mix of emotions when she started her career, but nothing compared to the day she was allowed to give her first injection. So read into that what you will. She actually took her final exams in 1953 on the day of the coronation, and she said it was memorable for so many reasons. And she loved working at Torbay Hospital and described her colleagues as her extended family. When she became a sister, she was so grateful to the NHS for the opportunities it gave her in her career. And she said her early nursing career was actually post-war rationing, and she remembers bread and dripping on the ward at 10 o'clock being a real highlight. She said she didn't notice much difference working in the hospital day to day when the NHS began, but she said her biggest change in her career came in 1967 with the Salmon Report. She said it brought more developed staffing structures and inspired lots of nurses to achieve senior nursing roles. So I just thought she was quite an iconic lady, and I wanted to feature her today. So just before I hand over to Steve, I just wanted to take a quote from Amanda Pritchard's speech at the NHS Confederation, and she said, "There are so many opportunities ahead of us, and we all have the power not just to take those opportunities, but to create even more." So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Steve now, who will talk you through some of the engagement we've done with our staff.
Thank you, Katie. So my name's Steve, and I work with Katie in the Communications Involvement and Inclusion team, and it's an absolute honour to be here today celebrating 75 years of the NHS. As part of the NHS 75 celebrations, we held a focus group with a small number of staff to look at the NHS past, present and future. This was a really positive session and was inspiring to hear from NHS Devon staff how far the NHS has come since it was founded in 1948. The findings from the session were shared with NHS England to help support a national campaign to celebrate the incredible work of the NHS. So when we look back, we had some key findings looking at the significant advancements in medicine and medical care, in particular technology, research and vaccinations, and the direct impact this has had on improving health outcomes, quality of life, and increasing life expectancy for local people. We discussed how the NHS has become an institution and a hugely significant part of the UK's identity. People are very protective about it, and in the discussions, it was described as the jewel in the crown of British society. We explored how integrating the patient voice and diversifying the NHS workforce has played a significant role in making health services more accessible for all and the NHS a more inclusive employer. The biggest shift we talked through is the move for the NHS becoming more prevention-focused to try and avoid people getting unwell in the first place and to make patients partners in managing their own health needs. So when we fast forward to 2023, we look at how we live in a more instantaneous society, and we bound around terms such as click and collect and next day delivery, and how this expectation has transferred to other services people use, including health. So managing expectations and looking at people's behaviour are going to be crucial in protecting the NHS services moving forward. Although the group recognised that there have been advancements in technology over the last 75 years, the group felt more could be done to manage conditions from home to relieve pressures facing the NHS. The more collaborative approach to delivering health and care services was recognised, and how this is benefiting patients as their journey takes them through the different services provided by different organisations. We finished this section by discussing how people feel more empowered to provide feedback and how the NHS must use this as a learning experience to improve services in the future. So, what does the future look like for the NHS? Is what we discussed as the last part of this section. So it was quite a pivotal point around the COVID pandemic, and the focus of discussion was the need for a reset after the past few years working through COVID-19. As an NHS, we are still understanding the full impact of this, and this be a contributing factor to how NHS services are delivered in the future. We discussed the need for better data on patients and the need to help inform the planning and delivery of services, treatment options and research. Artificial intelligence and robotic process automation will also be used more once they develop and become more mainstream. It was evident from discussions that work needs to be done to shift the mindset of where people will receive the best care. There was a perception that attending acute hospital services means better care will be received due to the diagnostics that are available. Looking forward, ideally there would be a shift to out-of-hospital care with support of a multidisciplinary team that focuses on prevention and personalisation with rapid access to diagnostics for the NHS to be sustainable in the future. The relationship between voluntary, community and social enterprise sector organisations and the NHS have never been better. The group explored the potential to build on this and work with them to provide services to alleviate pressure on statutory services. The final point we discussed was the number of unfilled NHS vacancies and how a more innovative approach to marketing vacancies and recruiting people into the workforce could be explored. So overall, what struck me most was the incredible pride that people have in the NHS and how much they care about it. Nearly everyone has a personal connection with the service, a story to tell about how it has helped them or their family. It was clear that NHS remains cherished and what a privileged position organisations like NHS Devon hold in shaping something so important to so many people. I've got a report I'm happy to share, so any questions, please contact me.
Thank you so much, Steve. I think it's really interesting, the click and collect point as well. It's just a really interesting point. So I just wanted to quickly touch on today our providers and our trusts and who we work with. They have been doing so much to celebrate NHS 75 with their staff and patients. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that they've been doing. So at Plymouth, they've hosted a podcast with their longest serving staff, and some of their staff have been at the hospital for over 50 years. We've obviously got the lighting up blue of the local landmarks and Derriford Hospital, the Fern Centre in North Devon and Reald RD&E are all being lit up. The charity teams at the hospitals have been using this as an opportunity to fundraise. They've launched long service awards for staff at some of the hospitals and even had things like a bake-off. So our trusts have really embraced this opportunity and this kind of once in a lifetime for some staff to celebrate. So I'm now going to hand back to Sarah to introduce some reflections from the board, and we'll get our lovely cake cut.
Well, thank you so much, Katie and Steve. Really appreciate that. And again, thank you, Lee, for everything that you did over the pandemic, for leading such an amazing team of staff and volunteers. And we will absolutely be mindful of the example you set about not being afraid to innovate. And so thank you for that. And I do remember the rain as well, and the volunteers in the rain, yes. And also thank you, if Barbara is listening today, thank you so much for your wonderful story and your service. We're very fortunate on this board to have so many people who have given so much to the NHS over the years. I realised myself when I was totting up the numbers that I've been working in the NHS for more than half the time it's been in existence, which is a bit scary, but I'm certainly not the only person here with that experience. And so I know a number of members of the board would like to come in and pay their own personal tributes. And I'd like to come first to Naomi Chapman, our Chief Nursing Officer. Thank you very much, Naomi.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, well, I joined the NHS, as many people did, at the age of 18 as an aspirant nurse, and I was very fortunate to join what I considered and what felt like at the time to be a family with what I now know is called a psychological contract, but at the time just felt like I belonged to something special. And the fact that we were looked after and cared for. And actually that small group of people I joined with at 18 are still my best friends, and we still are. They're all, actually with the exception of one, are still in nursing or in the NHS. So it's with some pride and some, you know, definitely a roller coaster of experience over those years of some amazing times and some very traumatic times, and some insights into the bravery of people who go through some very challenging things every day of their lives. You know, and we as staff, we visit that. We don't live it. They live it. We visit it and we support it. But I think what I've seen over the years is how those professional groups have transformed to meet the needs of the NHS. You know, we know that exponential increase in referrals, and you can quote the figures of, you know, an extra 40-odd% of referrals over 10 years, and that response has happened and been met because of the agility and the enthusiasm and the unending desire to care from all of those people who work within the NHS. And we've changed what we do. When I look back, what we did then was probably what you know, healthcare assistants may do now, and what we do now is probably what junior doctors and some of the medical profession did then. And how we've all adapted our roles, extended our roles, and really embraced all the dynamic opportunities of technology and agile working and different ways of working to be the responsive professional groups that we are now. So I'm also I'm qualified as an HP along my journey as well, and I can see how all of the professional groups, you know, healthcare scientists, and that breadth of people, from everybody who greets you at the door to the people who code your work behind the scenes, to the people who bring you a hot cup of tea when you feel awful, to all of those people in the NHS who come together to make you feel as well as be cared for. So I think my aspirations for the future is that breadth and that change is recognised and is embraced for the future in our different models of care, and that we can all be part of the planning for that, which is my motivation for being in the Integrated Care Board. And I think I can't really even begin to imagine what the next 75 years will be. And I had the same scary moment as you, was thinking that I've nearly been here for nearly half of it, which is quite daunting. But to think how far it's come in that time and how far it could go is quite an amazing concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. That's extraordinarily powerful. That's great. Thank you. And I'd like to come to Hisham Khalil, who's joining us. And thank you, Hisham, because I know you're taking time out of your annual leave to join us today, so much appreciated. Hisham, unfortunately, we can't hear you at the moment.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, so can you hear me now? Thank you. So thank you very much, Chair. I first joined the NHS over 30 years ago as an ear, nose and throat surgical trainee in North Wales, and I've since worked in the Southwest in Plymouth, Bristol, Royal Devon and Exeter, and then came back to Plymouth as a consultant surgeon. And I first started, although I was born in the UK, as an international medical graduate, and I found it quite accepting, great environment to work in the NHS. And I've seen great developments in the NHS since I've started, with digital health, personalized patient care, and patient-centeredness. And despite the challenges, as somebody who has experience of healthcare delivery across a number of areas in the world, I think we should be really proud of our NHS, which is one of the best healthcare systems still in the world. Of course, there are challenges, and we will be able to achieve them working together using new models of health.
So when I first started working in the NHS cervical screening programme was just about getting up and running and sort of universal coverage. But not long after that, some of the extraordinary researchers in our NHS in the UK began to understand the role of human papillomaviruses in the cause of cervical cancer, and very rapidly were able to build that knowledge into cervical screening, and we were then able to build that into a vaccination programme, which has now been rolled out for young girls and now boys, because we now understand the role of human papillomaviruses in a variety of different cancers. And so the outlook for women today, who at the start of my career, many of whom would have developed cervical cancer, which would have caused extraordinary trouble to them and unfortunately resulted in the deaths of many, we've completely altered the course of that disease over my own relatively short career. And I just think back, as I say, to many of those extraordinary colleagues who I've had the privilege to work with over my career, and think that these are the sorts of skills and the sort of expertise that is going to meet the challenges that we face for the next 75 years of the NHS. And whilst I may not be working in it for the whole of that time, I very much expect that I will benefit from some of those innovations myself over the course of the next few years. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Nigel, and I think there's a real theme of innovation here today and how we can face the future. But we're not going to do that just as an NHS. We're part of a partnership with many other organisations, and I'm very grateful to Sarah Lou Glover for sharing her observations. Thank you, and thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a mere fledgling in the NHS. So my first role is as partner member for mental health, but what that means, how significant that is, that as a voluntary sector member to be part of this amazing and developing board. So first of all, I want to say a huge thanks to all of our mental health staff, those in the NHS and those in the millions of community organisations around us as well. And I want to thank all our volunteers that work within this integrated care system, and the thousands of unpaid carers who are often family members who don't even recognise themselves as carers. Thank you to all those who work tirelessly in community organisations, over 6,000 across Devon, and many staff employed on short-term contracts, and some volunteer their time, as we've heard today, and some are unpaid carers themselves. Many of these organisations are born out of families' own struggles with their own mental health and physical health, and this creates a real drive and passion in everything that they do, often growing organically and adapting accordingly to the needs of those that they support. They require tenacity to survive, and by chasing grants, fundraising, bidding for short-term, often non-recurrent funding, and making every penny stretch just as far as it can by partnering with other like-minded community services. These organisations and the people have first-hand experience of health services, which can teach us so much, helping us to understand what we do well and what we can build on, and what hasn't gone so well, and how we might be able to improve in these areas. And there's something here about us getting better as well at not asking the same questions of the same people time and time again. How can we capture that and improve what we've already started? Having our citizens alongside us as we develop and improve services has proven to be invaluable in increasing accessibility and meeting individuals' needs as a person-centred approach. As we move forward and develop our understanding in population health, health inequalities and prevention, I strongly believe that we need to invest in our communities and learn from their versatility. VCSE partners are adept at responding to the needs of local communities, not because of lengthy participation programmes, but because they are run by the community, for their communities, in meaningful and innovative ways. We've made huge progress with VCSE reference groups in localities and prevention work streams, and even the creation of a VCSE assembly, which has been recognised as an anchor institution within this integrated care system. Staff retention is often higher in these organisations as they're valued. They feel valued, they're offered meaningful supervision spaces and opportunities to develop their strengths and trusted to work with autonomy, being empowered to make a difference on a daily basis. The NHS have given us a blueprint in allowing and supporting the power of communities outlined in NHS Working with People and Communities. And my hope is that we will consider these communities as citizens, as caregivers, as equal partners in this developing integrated care system.
Thank you so much, Sarah Lou, and to all of the volunteers and partners working along the NHS for, as I say, the next 75 years. So that is great. And I'd just like to throw it open because other members of the board, thank you so much, Graham Clark.
Thank you. I'd like to share something that I don't think anybody here knows about me, actually. As a student needing money, I used to work in the summer holidays as a porter for several years. And as a young lad, it's very interesting to observe at the time the hierarchy that there was about who would talk to whom, and doctors knew that you were a student and would talk to you and others wouldn't. And that hierarchy thing really struck me as something that needed to change, and I think it has significantly changed. So that's my first very, very early reflection. Then, still as a student, my father died of cancer, actually, too young. And it made me think about what I wanted to do post-degree, postgraduate degree. And I was offered a job to run the clinical trials of a new machine in Hammersmith Hospital, and that machine was MRI. And we have to remember that this country invented both CT scanning and MRI imaging. And when I look back now at the impact that sort of innovation has made to the country, it's been a phenomenal journey. So I thought I'd just share those two stories with you.
Thank you so much, Graham. It's really powerful and extraordinary, the reminder of the importance of innovation. So thank you. Would anyone else like to say anything? Because we are coming soon to the cake cutting. I know, Jane, you were going to make your reflections as well during your chair's report, but Chief Exec's report, but we can do that now.
Well, yes. I suppose whilst I was sitting here, I was just... So I'm a clinician, as people know, and have worked in the NHS, in fact, longer than 36 years, if you include the start time of 18. One thing we talk a lot about is the doctors, nurses, therapists, clinicians, but actually we couldn't do any of it without some of our team, our management team, the people who work behind the scenes, doing the analytics, and actually there is a significant drumbeat, shall we say, of media attention about the overstuffed managers who work in the NHS, but actually without the triumvirate of the patient and the clinician and somebody to actually do the doing, we wouldn't get very far. And our comparative spending on administration is 1.9% compared to 8.9% in the States. You could say, well, it would be because that's the type of system that they have. But in Canada, which has just switched back to having a similar approach to healthcare, it's 3.3%. So I think actually we mustn't forget our efficiencies. Still more to be done, but actually also part of the glue of the NHS is also the people who do the work behind, not behind the scenes, but actually do the work actually to help ensure that we are getting the best out of our clinical teams and out of our systems. And as I say, I think sometimes we never have an opportunity to celebrate that as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Oh, Tandy.
Yeah, I think just to add on to all those nice, wonderful tributes. So a few years ago, I was up in Bristol Children's Hospital with my son who's got sickle cell. And I'd been in that hospital for 2 weeks, I think, at that point, really tired and, you know, things sort of appearing to be getting worse and worse. And then I went into the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea. And then there's a gentleman in there who was really angry about the fact that there wasn't milk in the kitchen and he couldn't find a clean mug. And so he was sort of, you know, oh, what's wrong with these people? No, they can't even provide tea. And so he just went on and went on and went on. And I sat there thinking, what an awful man. And then I said to him, you know, I mean, I can wash the mug for you if you want. And then he sort of brought himself back and said, oh, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have been ranting like that. But the reason I'm here is because my son, who had cancer of the spine, came in for a lumbar puncture. And apparently they hadn't done some scanning or something, but whilst they were doing that lumbar puncture, his spinal cord got crushed, and so now he can't walk out of the hospital again. So it was now my turn to feel really guilty for sort of judging him. But what really struck me was that he was finding it really hard to blame anybody in that process. And he went on and said, I feel really sorry for the young doctor for who this has happened, because he's got to have to live with this for the rest of his life. He really meant well. He's been caring for my son very, very well. And my son was right on the up in terms of treatment. It's this new thing that's come in. He's never going to walk again. But what really struck me was the fact that even after that devastating mistake, error, or whatever happened, he was very complimentary of the staff. And I think that the NHS is also about the people that work in it. That even when things don't turn out right, people still feel that there's good intention and care. So I think that our people are people that we really need to value.
Thank you very much, Tandy. And I think that we all have stories of extraordinary compassion and care in our contacts with the NHS, and we have to remind ourselves that that is at the heart of everything that we do. So I would say now we're going to move on to the inevitable cake cutting. And we're all immensely sad, Jane, that you're going to be retiring this autumn, and want to say a special thanks to you as well, and wonder whether you would do the honours. And then while the cake is then being cut up further, dissected further, we've got a lovely film that our comms team have put together that we'll be looking at and then having a break. And just in closing, I'd just like to say again, thank you so much to everybody across our NHS partners and beyond for everything you do and for the difference you make, the profound difference you make to people's lives. So thank you. Right, Jane, the honours.
Is there a ceremonial sword?
There are several swords here, I have to say.
Lovely. Thank you, Jane. Great.
So thank you. We've now got, as I say, a lovely video featuring many of our staff across the organisation. So thank you very much, Katie.
My name's Tom Debenham. I've been a GP in Exmouth since 1988.
My name's Jo Moore. I'm a management accountant for the running costs in the ICB.
My name's James Glanville, so I'm Head of Urgent and Emergency Care in the Plymouth locality of NHS Devon. I think the thing that's really attractive about working in the NHS and has kept me there is that no matter what role you're in within healthcare and social care, you're helping people on a daily basis.
I come from a family of doctors, and I never really thought about doing anything else, but working for the NHS. It always seemed to have have the right values, and I found medicine fascinating and still do.
The fact that the NHS is constantly changing, it's constantly changing, it's innovating, you never know what's around the corner. It's challenging, it's exciting, it doesn't stay still.
The other thing is just around working with people with those same values, around making people's lives better. I've never really thought of working in any other sector since I've been in the NHS.
I've been working in the NHS for 42 years, and I think the thing that still excites me is the challenge that every day offers.
It makes you learn things, it makes you change, it keeps you growing as a person.
The biggest change that I've seen when people had heart failure in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't do an awful lot for them, and it would be an awful visit you'd be called out to when someone was very short of breath and almost drowning. Whereas quite quickly treatments came in that helped with that, and now we just don't see people who have that same symptomatology or condition, and it's fantastic how their life has been extended and the quality of life has been vastly improved.
I think looking over the span of my career, the biggest thing for me was when computers were introduced. And I remember at the time we were all fearful for our jobs, thinking that, gosh, once they've got computers, they won't need so many people because you'll be able to press a button and they'll have the information. And actually what happened was, because we were able to supply more information and faster, we actually brought a lot of services back in-house, and the more you provided, the more information was required.
I guess the more gradual changes that I've seen since I started, people are living for longer now, which is a great thing, but it does put more strain on our services.
When the computers came in, we had one computer, so we all took turns on it, and I remember the excitement and the fear when you switched it on for the first time.
I think probably the most challenging time and rewarding time was the COVID period, because the way in which we were able to work changed, a lot for everyone.
So I think the thing that I'm being most proud of has been recently when, as a team at DRSS, we've developed the formulary and referral website and app for GPs.
I like to feel that I'm providing a good service and helping in any way that I can. I may not be helping in the bigger sense, helping with patients, but you need the backroom functions to allow those things to happen.
What really made me proud around that was the way people pulled together. We had to work in different ways. We worked as one team across our whole system.
The changes that I'm expecting to be most groundbreaking in the NHS are going to be related to epigenetics, I think. Having read quite a lot about it recently, I just think that is the most exciting area.
We've been through a really difficult period, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, and in the southwest it can be really challenging around workforce. That is nationally as well, so a real drive around growing our own workforce, and that's not just in healthcare, it's in social care. That is going to be key to driving things forward.
We're going to see some massive changes because it's talking about individual treatment programs that can be just tailored to the exact condition for the exact patient, and that's very exciting.
It's forever changing, and I think that's the thing about the NHS. Things come to light all the time. We've got all these people working on cures and research and development. if you look back 50 years, what we could do then and what we can do now, totally different beast.
It makes me feel quite old thinking that I am coming up to 30 years working in the NHS, and it's gone really quickly.
We got a lot to be proud of, the way we can provide care.
Well, thank you so much, everybody who took part in that lovely film, and thank you again, Katie and Steve, for putting that together. So I think we're going to take a break now for the cake, and we'll see you back here, we hope at 11:05. Thank you very much. So welcome back and thank you. So we're now coming on to the section of our board meeting which is around leadership and governance. And we have my chair's report, which I'd ask you to note. I don't have any additional comments to add to that, but I do want to come to Jane Milligan, our Chief Executive, and for her report.
I haven't gone yet.
No, for you.
No, it's fine. Right, thank you. So the only thing I wanted just to add was, since the report was written, of course, we've had the long-term workforce plan, which we will be bringing back through different routes into the board. I mean, the key headlines are essentially sort of three bullet points is train, retain and reform. And as well as a real focus on increasing the percentage of people going through training and I think 2.4 billion cash envelope for that. There's also obviously a real focus on how we do that differently, so through apprenticeships and also exploring different educational routes. So I think it's fair to say there's quite a lot more to be done to basically sit down and look through and look at the implications of the workforce plan. It's a 15-year plan with a 2-year refresh. I know that Paul has done some work to Paul Renshaw has done some work to sort of try to pull together a summary. If we haven't sent that round to board members, we have. Okay, that's good. We will do, but we'll need to come back to that at a future date, and obviously through the People and Culture Committee as well. But in fact, in many respects, it has implications for our system recovery plan, new models of working, and also in terms of our professional leadership arrangements as well. So anyway, it's been a long time coming, and I think certainly good to have it now. Myself and Bill will be joining other Chief Exec colleagues. In fact, I think it's the same day as our next development session on the 2nd of August, where we've been invited to do a sort of executive with NHS colleagues. That will be chaired by David Sloman, and that's the opportunity to get a bit of an update on our position in relation to our performance and finance recovery plan, and I certainly think we will have a really good opportunity to demonstrate the progress that we are making. So we will share more information when we are closer to that. So that was all I was going to say.
Thank you very much, Jane. Does anyone have any questions for Jane? No. Thank you. So we're going to come on now to the Devon 5-year joint forward plan, which I'm really pleased to say we published at the end of June. And I think, Nigel, you were going to lead on this item.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. It's a great pleasure to be able to present this, as you say, completed plan that colleagues from right across Devon have contributed to over the last year or so. It is, of course, a response to the strategy that our colleagues, and we're, of course, some of us members of the One Devon Partnership, developed and set us 12 key challenges and a set of goals in that strategy, which are related to the 4 key purposes of our ICB. So the 5-year forward view for us, this joint forward plan, is a really important document for us. Included in it is the recovery plan that this board have heard a lot of detail about over recent board meetings, and it sets out our course for the next number of years. So really important. I don't propose to dwell on all of the pages in the document, you'll be very pleased to hear, but if I could point you towards page 35 of our pack, delivering a sustainable system. One of the things that our joint forward plan sets out is not just the plans for the health colleagues in the NHS, but the wider Devon system partners, with some key milestones for delivery. But in order to achieve all of these goals and ambitions that are set out in the plan, we do need to continue the transformation that we've begun in the way that we work together across our system. We need to create those new ways of working, and that was something that we identified ourselves as a stakeholder partnership of one of the things that we need to do better in Devon. And so our integrated care strategy, our joint forward plan and our operating model that's set out in a separate document are really important for us, not just in this room, but across all stakeholder partners if we are to be successful. So if I could flash ahead now to slide 120 in your packs. The intervening pages contain quite a lot of the detail of what's contained in the plan. But I thought for colleagues on the board today, what I'd just briefly cover is the plan for delivering our joint forward plan, and then some of the challenges and risks to set up a conversation with board colleagues today. So as you'll see on slide 120, we set out in bullet points how we propose that the joint forward plan will be delivered. It'll be delivered through this new system architecture that we will create together through primary care networks and primary care collaboratives. Our local care partnerships obviously have a critical role in our integrated care system. Other networks, provider collaboratives as they mature and evolve, and also our system level transformation programme boards. And we also set out on this slide our proposals for how we will undertake the assurance of the plan. We will be curating and sort of curating on behalf of the system this plan, which itself is live. It is a plan that we will refresh over time to make sure that it remains relevant. And that will be done as for the drawing together the plan in the first place with system partners help. We obviously have a plan for engagement, not just at ICB level, but with our partner organisations, and as I say, that annual refresh. On slide 121, colleagues can dwell on this at leisure. It sets out how we propose to deliver some of the transformations that will be required in order to achieve what we set out in the plan. And equally on slide 122, we set out where we think the accountability, or where we set out a framework for accountability where we think that accountability for ourselves and our system partners sits in successfully delivering our plan. And on page 123, what we set out is our evolving ICS outcomes framework with some indicators that we hope will point us to the success and how we will know that we're succeeding in improving the health and health care for the people of Devon by implementing the elements of our plan. So on page 124, or sorry, on slide 124, we set out some challenges and risks to the delivery of the plan, and perhaps this is where we might enter a discussion with colleagues around the board. I think that there were a number of potential risks that we saw, and I hope that we've provided some mitigation for one of the main risks, which was that there seemed at one stage to be a potential lack of synergy between the joint forward plan that we were developing and our very important system recovery plan. And as I say, we've put some of the mitigation a little bit later on for that. We do still worry potentially that there might be insufficient capacity to deliver the transformational change that's going to be required in order to deliver our plan, whilst also focusing on recovery. And hence that linkage between the system recovery plan and our joint forward plan is very important. And clearly, we all know the clinical, operation and financial pressures that are present in our system. And we know that those can impact on both decision making by partner stakeholder organisations, to involvement and the ability to engage colleagues from some of those stakeholders under such pressure, and their ability to free colleagues up to help us with the co-design and delivery of our programme. And I think we also need to recognise that we've just entered phase one of the consultation for our own restructuring, and I think that any organisation that is entering that process with an outcome of losing 30% plus of our staff, that has to be both a challenge and a risk to delivery of our plan. But we are working to try and align the year 1, year 2 objectives in our plan with the system recovery plan that, as I say, is so important to us here in Devon. And we're developing a roadmap to help us both with the development we need in terms of innovation and also the maturity of our system to be able to be greater than the sum of its individual parts, which is going to be so necessary for delivering our plan together. And then just lastly on slide 125, just a brief outline of our proposals to keep this plan live and its future development. We acknowledge that we do
plan, and I think, well, I know that some people are concerned that is it too ambitious? But I think for me, we've got to have ambition. Especially in the times we're in, it's very easy to concentrate on the financial issues that we have, both of it, national health and across local government, etc. But we must try and look beyond that, and I think this 5-year forward plan does look beyond that. And we had a very good morning, as you know, at Sandy Park, not very long ago, when we concentrated on prevention and those people who are less fortunate than ourselves. And I think the buzz in the room gave me a great deal of confidence that everybody understands this plan. As you say, the question is of the delivery of it. And could I just say, as chair of the One Devon Partnership, we must make sure that the partnership is able to monitor this plan in a meaningful way and influence it. And with all the difficult financial issues that we all have, we must make sure that the partnership there's no point in a partnership unless it can actually make a difference and monitor it in an effective way. And that's the one thing of this I would say to all of those around the table. Please bear that in mind when decisions are being made about how we have to cut our cloth to meet the finances that are available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. I'm going to come to Judy Hargaden.
Hi, thank you very much for a very helpful summary and introduction. Picking up on James's point, I mean, this is an integrated plan, and all the organisations that are part of the system in Devon will be doing things to make it happen or to prevent it happening. And I just wanted to be assured that the provider NHS trusts and the local authorities and their relevant committees had approved it. I know there's lots of other players involved, but those are the big funding organisations. And I can't recall what the process was around that, and apologies if I should have read it in here, but just assure me that others are making the same commitment.
Yes, they are. So there was as you know, it was very deliberately produced by them, and it's been round all of the health and wellbeing boards and also the individual provider organisation boards.
And I'm going to bring in James McInnes again.
And just to add to that, I think you raise a very big issue, is the plan is way wider than it just the NHS. And that's good. And I really celebrate that, and I hope we all do. But it is really important, again, that how we work in partnership and how the One Devon partnership can actually call to account not only the NHS side of things, but let's take housing. This is one example. And I was only talking to my colleague earlier here about, we brought lots of people in international recruitment and nurses, those in social care, etc. And we're managing to find housing for them but it really is and it's a really big issue. And it's not taking the housing responsibilities away at all from the district councils, Plymouth, Torbay, but it's actually working in a coordinated way to actually try and make a difference in the key areas where there's a real logjam of this appropriate housing available. And I think the partnership can help to do that, and that's why we will be working across the wider partnership in so many issues, not just the central health issues, because they all have an effect on each other.
Thank you, James. And this is the first time we've had a truly joint forward plan, but now we need to be very clear about
as part of the engagement, and that happens right across the ICB in all of the organisations.
And I'd also clarify that the voluntary sector are represented. 3 members are on the One Devon partnership, so and have been involved in the Change Leaders events, and we've had very good engagement from VCSE partners and enthusiasm for this different way of working. Does that answer your question, Sarah Lou? Because I'm conscious of time that we do need to.
Yeah, I guess I come back to my frequent point that engagement is one thing, and seeing them as an equal partner is another.
Thank you for that. And I think Hisham is wanting to make a comment. Hisham?
Yes, just a very brief comment, Chair. In the implementation of the plan going forward, are there mechanisms? A lot of echoing there, sorry. Differences and addressing them as we move forward.
I'm sorry, I think we missed part of that. Did you get enough of the gist of that, Nigel?
So I think the long and short of it was the governance of the plan. So we've got a couple of groups set up within the ICB, and one of them is the System Management Executive, which will have colleagues from across the health and local authority partners, which can feed up to us at the board for any of the issues that can't be resolved below that. And we're working on a process for, if it were the case that a piece of the plan needed some targeted investment, how we would take a business case forward, and then if there were some concerns about lack of delivery for other reasons, then we can escalate to here, because as Councillor McInnes says, we have a plan here which involves much broader than just the health partners. It's local authority, it's voluntary sector colleagues, and we need to have that mechanism where, as I say, we effectively are curating and coordinating, but we don't necessarily have all of the levers ourselves, but we do through this board, I think, have the connectivity and also the One Devon partnership should we need it as well.
Thank you. And I think Frank wanted to come in, and then I think we need to move to our next item. So Frank.
Thank you, Sarah. Congratulations to everyone who's pulled this together so quickly. I think it's really, really good. And the most important part is that it's an iterative process, and we will be working on it again for next year. So I'd just like to make a plea for 2 sections. One is the Green Plan. I think it needs a fair bit of work. It's vital that we have that in our mind for everything we do in terms of the transformation. The other comes from my role as a member of the Armed Forces Clinical Reference Group. There is, as a result of the Armed Forces Act, we have a duty of due regard, all public bodies in due regard in any decisions made about housing, health, whatever. I managed to get 3 lines referenced in there, but we have a big Armed Forces community in Devon, and the community is veterans serving, reserves and families, so we just need to think about that, please.
Thank you for that very important reminder. Thank you. Right, so we're going to come on next to item 10, which is around the board assurance framework, and we have a proposal here that we'd like the board's approval for the updated iteration of this and to agree a couple of items. But I'm going to hand over to Anne now to take us through those. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So this is a Q1 update on the BAF. It provides, hopefully, some assurance around some of the actions that have been taking place. I think we need to be mindful that by October we'll be mid-year. Now, I'm jumping ahead, but actually looking at the risk scores, there needs to be some, and I would probably give some suggestion that the assurance committees start really drilling down to some of the actions within the BAF. And that would be a really positive input going forward, so that the BAF starts to reflect timescales and that you can then start seeing if the risks are going to be mitigated in the timescales that are expected. At the moment, none of the risk scores have changed, which isn't unusual, but I do think that as moving forward, as you develop and have those far more in-depth conversations, that you start to look at those areas. In terms of the paper, we have mapped now the risks to the forward plan. The joint forward plan highlighted 3 risks, and I do believe that all 3 have been reflected in the BAF, and that the programs, the enabling programs and the delivery programs are also reflected now in the BAF, so that there is that link through. So that's the biggest change, I think, on the BAF. In terms of the recommendations, one is is the board content with the current BAF? We have created a new risk under Objective 13. So are you content that that reflects accurately the risk relating to that Objective 13? And there was a recommendation to bring together Objectives 2 and 3 into a single risk, instead of the 2 that are currently on the BAF. But I've spoken to Nigel, and my suggestion, recommendation, is actually not to rush to that conclusion, but to allow the Population Health Committee to review those risks as part of its assurance to the board, and whether that would be appropriate.
Thank you very much, Anne. So your recommendation at the moment is that we sit tight and we don't at this point merge the 2 risks, but that we do go ahead and approve a new risk under number 13. And I personally, I would be in support of that, because I can see also that the assurance committee that's named to take some of these tasks on is not reflecting the fact that we will have a new committee to be looking at population health. So I wonder whether I could bring anybody else in who'd like to comment on this. Nigel?
I completely agree.
That was simple, wasn't it? Does anybody have any other points they'd like to make? Frank, I can see, and also Kevin would like to come in.
I absolutely agree with not merging them, because 2 of the main aims of an ICS are inequalities and population health management and prevention. It would seem strange to merge the 2.
Thank you. And Kevin?
Yes, thank you. It's a general point, really. First of all, just to thank everyone who's been involved in developing this, because I just think it's come on leaps and bounds, really, since we started this work about 6 months ago. And I think it's looking in a really good place now. And just to echo Anne's point, that I think this is now in a state in which the assurance committees can really start using it and working with it and reporting back into the board on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Graham Clark.
Thank you. So first, can I support, Frank, your position on the merger? Second point is that we don't know what the timeline is to achieve the target, but I do observe that mental health and learning disabilities only gets to orange. Is that, as a matter of principle, acceptable? I know it's my starting point that's higher than many others, but I just wondered whether we should be a bit more ambitious in our target.
Thank you, Anne.
Can we take that through to the Assurance Committee for them to deliberate that one?
Thank you. So if everybody's content, then we will take your recommendation, and thank you too for taking the time to map in and link this across to the joint forward plan. I think that was very helpful. So we'll take it that we're not going to at this stage merge 2 and 3, and that we're going to agree that we're going to approve the new risk under Objective 13. So in closing, I'd just like to thank you very much again, Anne, for the work that you've put into this. Thank you. Right. Is that good? Right, so we're now going to move on to item 11, and that's our One Devon Partnership Chairs report, and I'm going to hand over to James McInnes.
I'm going to say happy to note and take it as read, unless anyone's got any questions, and very happy to answer.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for James? No? Thank you very much, James, for your report. So we're now going to come on to item 12, and this is the Safeguarding Annual Report. We're being asked here to approve the Safeguarding Report and agree its publication, and that's for the Annual Report 22-23, and I'm going to hand over to Naomi Chapman, our Chief Nursing Officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So the report's been produced by the Safeguarding team, which sits within the Nursing Directorate. And as you can see from the report, it covers a broad variety of aspects of safeguarding. So working on the principle that we've all had opportunity to see it, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that I think are important for us to consider or to acknowledge. So we've had an NHSE safeguarding visit in November of last year, which looked at our approach to safeguarding across the system and acknowledged that safeguarding remains a priority for us, and that we've got some improved relationships, and also the recognition of the value of our domestic abuse and teams. So moving on from that, as you can see, the report's structured into adult, children and primary care, and then domestic abuse and sexual violence teams, and it gives you an overview of the achievements both of the teams in terms of relationships, in terms of the amount of reviews we've had, because we've had 6, I think, in the adult arena and 6 reviews in the child arena. And it also then focuses on the areas for us to ensure that we focus on going forward, which is in particular things of supporting our safeguarding team. We know that these are challenging roles, and as our team and our restructure changes, we need to make sure that they remain supported and that they continue with the intensity of their relationships with all of our partners across the area. I think it's also great to note, if I could take you probably to section 6.4 or 6.2 onwards, which focuses on some of the recognition for our teams across Devon. And we've had things like highly recommended at the Health Service Journal Patient Safety Award, and national invitations and recognition for the work of various aspects of the team. I wasn't going to pick up on anything else, particularly from the team. They are actually all in either reviews or national meetings today, but very happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Judy Hargaden and then to Graham Clark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please thank the authors for a very comprehensive report, and it's really good to see strengths and then areas to develop in a report like this. It's great. I have one query, and I don't expect it to be answered now, but in 4.4 we're talking about children in care, and in a report here it says assurance is received from providers about compliance. This is with the health checks. So this is a detailed question. But in the last IQPR we had, not today's one, but the previous one, so I'm bringing Anthony in a way, I asked a query about the failure and the very rather poor statistics on doing the health checks on children in care. And it might be a timing issue. This report was written while it was still really good, and suddenly it deteriorated. That page appears to have disappeared from this IQPR, and I know we're constantly reviewing and reflecting, but I just wonder if you could go and have a look at that issue again, because it seems to me that children in care are absolutely the most vulnerable children. And if we have some issues about the health checks and people getting around to them, then there isn't that surveillance to spot. So I wonder if you would, I'm absolutely not expecting an answer now, but it would be helpful if you could have a look at that again.
Yes, no, absolutely, Judy, and I think I agree. It is a core element of our focus, and I'll pick up with Laura and the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you. I wanted to go to 4.3 actually, which is the numbers. I needed to make sure I understand what I'm looking at. The heading is the number of children placed outside of Devon. but it's obviously divided by a local authority. Are those individual cases, or are there multiple counts for those? Because they seem to me quite high. And if those are the numbers, where are they being placed? Because I would have thought for children, you wouldn't want this to be a high number.
I was going to pick up the same point that Graham has just made, but in addition, 1.4, I just wonder whether the complexity of the whole safeguarding structure, as portrayed in that paragraph, does that add value or does it make it more risky? I mean, there's a number of different boards that you're having to report into all the time. I would imagine a small team working to that would be really quite difficult.
I can see Jane would like to come into this, Jane Milligan.
It's a really good point, and I suppose what we're trying to work with our local authorities is about how we can streamline that, because currently we have to, provide staff for 3 different sets of adults and children, and there's no coming together. And I think recently we're trying to do some work about representation, particularly for children with disabilities or special education needs. And at the moment, there are 37 different meetings that Naomi's and Joe Turl's team are required to attend, which, frankly, we can't do. So there is something that we're trying to do to understand across the whole health family who needs to be at what, because we've also got our provider colleagues who are sometimes not always represented, and I think part of the issue is there are statutory arrangements, but actually as an ICB and an ICS we are a partnership, so trying to look at the opportunity to sort of work with our providers about how we might ensure at least there is the right person at the right meeting. So there is a little bit about testing that through. In relation to safeguarding, I think, as I say, it's probably more streamlined than perhaps comes across here, but it does add to the quite complex system of meetings. And of course, each of our local authorities are in different levels of performance challenge, and that adds another level of complexity for them as well as for us. So we recognise that we haven't quite got that balance right.
Thank you. Steve Brown.
Thank you, Chair. On the 27th and 28th of June, we had the National Advisor for Care Leavers visit us in Devon, Mark Rydell, and Sue Smart was there as well from the NHS, but there was multiple partners, including the personal assistants working with children in care, but also our colleagues in district councils around housing. His visit was really to do a very rapid assessment of the actions we should be putting in place pretty damn quick to really scale up our improvement around children in care and care leavers. I think it would be quite helpful, given this conversation, for the board to see sight of some of those actions. Some of those actions are out of scope of a particular board, but some of it are really interesting, say, ranging from housing, support for emotional health and well-being, right up through to CAMS. But on the second day, he played back to an audience of probably 30 or 40, and his exact words were, he's done, I think, about 40 or 50 visits up and down the country. He had never been in a room with so many players. So the feedback to the broad audience of people, arguably from the ICS, was fantastic. Some really challenging feedback, having spoken to care leavers about their experience in Devon, which we have to hear. So I think it'd probably helpful to circulate those actions for the board to have sight of, if people are agreeable. Sue will probably have them anyway, but I think it'd be good.
So yes, thank you very much, Steve. I think colleagues would be very grateful to see that report and to have a follow-up at our next public board on the queries that have been raised, because this is of huge interest. Any other colleagues wanting to come in? No? Thank you very much, Naomi. I'm going to come now to item 13, which is the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Integrated Care Board update. Kate's unfortunately not able to join us today, so I'm proposing to take this as read and to note it. So thank you. Right, and then we come on to the section of our board which is around improving outcomes in population health and healthcare, and the integrated quality and performance and finance report. And Anthony Fitzgerald was going to lead on this item. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Chair. There are, you'll be pleased to know, 5 things I wanted to highlight, although I'm sure everybody has perused the report in great detail. I think the first thing to say is the NHS 75 and some of the comments that we've had very early in our meeting today are actually a testament to some of the collaborative joint working that is evident over a prolonged period of industrial action. That prolonged period of industrial action has actually impacted on performance, and specifically around unscheduled care. So our emergency services have done a valiant effort in terms of maintaining safe care through our periods of industrial action. However, that does mean that we've taken a hit in terms of our overall performance, as you'll see from the report, mainly because we have less hands being able to deliver care at peak times, but also it's not necessarily the industrial action, it's the recovery periods afterwards that have the biggest impact. That being said, in terms of our overall performance, we are just shy of our trajectory, and we have a large piece of work that's focused very much on our unscheduled care. We are also the subject of additional support in terms of the tiering process, and have national colleagues joining us in terms of that, and particularly looking at what additional things we can be doing across our acute providers and our mental health providers in terms of delivery of unscheduled care. Our ambulance service colleagues have also been subject to a tiering process, and we will be joining them in terms of the improvements that we need to make in terms of ambulance response times. That being said, we have continued to make strident efforts in terms of elective care and diagnostics. You will see the improvements there in terms of this report, which obviously is a snapshot in time, and improvements have continued with further reductions both in terms of those patients waiting 78 weeks and also further reductions in terms of those long waiters over 65 weeks. And I'll be hoping to present a much better picture on that next month as we continue to eliminate 78 weeks and reduce the number of people waiting in Devon over 65 weeks. And that's some really targeted work across our elective specialties, but also some key areas of innovation and sharing the load across the whole of Devon, which we'll be reporting on in terms of our elective orthopaedic pathways at our next board. Our hospital discharge continues to be a work in progress, but actually a work in very much in terms of improvement. The figure that's reported of 9% is half of what it was a year ago, and that's patients waiting in hospital who arguably shouldn't be there. So 9% is actually one of the best in the region, something that perhaps we don't always get the plaudits for. Not that we're expecting plaudits, but actually it's a testament to the joint working between health and local authorities across the whole of the county, and we've seen some continued improvements there, even with the impact of reductions in care market and also some of the difficulties that we have sometimes in accessing services outside of hospital. In terms of primary and community care, you'll see that there's a very blunt measure there in terms of appointments occurring within 2 weeks, but actually we narrowly missed that for the last reporting period. And mental health is very much a subject of intense scrutiny at the moment. For us as a system, we're very conscious both of the issues affecting all elements of mental health, and we have a mental health urgent emergency care process and improvement plan currently being formulated across all providers and also with primary care to try and access some of that, and I'll be pleased to bring that back at a subsequent meeting. And in terms of reports at subsequent meetings, it was highlighted last board around children and young people's services, and we will be having a deep dive into that at our next board meeting. And it may well be that we want to pick up some of the issues that have just been highlighted as part of that. That being said, happy to take any questions regarding the report.
Thank you very much for that, Anthony. We'll look forward to hearing the further detail that you've referred to. Judy Hargaden would like to come in.
Thank you, and I'm really glad we're going to have a detailed look at children and young people in the August meeting. That's really good. This report continues to improve and to add things, although it's lost my figures I was looking for earlier. I note we have the community waiting lists, I believe for the first time, or I haven't spotted them last time. I've got them on page 335 of the pack. And so it's very, very good to have information on those, but some of those numbers are jolly large. And so given that everything we're talking about in terms of resolving our system challenges are about admission avoidance, the work we're doing around primary care and the work we're doing around community care, I think it would be helpful, again, to have a little amplification of those figures next time. I mean, it's great that they're in, but just a little bit of, you know, we just have numbers, I think. We don't have delays and things. So good start, but let's learn a little more on that too.
No, absolutely. I think there's a lot more required in terms of understanding some of the numbers, particularly across the whole of Devon, and where the real issues are. So certainly we'll be bringing that back.
Thank you. Frank Kelly.
Just one thing about productivity. I mean, at the moment, the sort of timelines show relatively recent productivity. Primary care is getting measured against the number of appointments it had in 2019, 2020, and we are up about 5% on that. Do we know what the comparative data is for other parts of the system in terms of appointments of people being seen through outpatient appointments in mental health and through the acute sector?
In short, no. But what we can do is pull some of that together. I think the information for both primary care and mental health has been somewhat difficult to either obtain or interpret. And I think we would be wanting to drill into that in a bit more detail to basically present a Devon system approach.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, well, I know many of the items in this report are covered off by several of our assurance committees, so thank you very much again, Anthony. And I'm going to come now to the item on mental health inpatient treatment beds for autistic people or people with a learning disability. And we're being asked here to approve the commissioning and financial consequences of the inpatient beds and to support the provider's submission of the business case to NHS England once it's been through their board for approval. So taking us through this report, thank you very much, which has also been considered by the Finance and Performance Committee. I'm going to ask Nigel to present on this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm bringing this paper back. We talked at board about this business case in sort of outline principle form previously. And as you say, we have been working particularly on the business case element of this, working with colleagues in the Finance Committee as well, and bring this paper back to you, having gone through that process, hopefully to seek approval for both the commissioning and financial consequences of procuring these inpatient beds, and also to seek support from the board that once the provider has put the business case through their own board, that we would then support that business case for the funding. So just in summary, the ambition for us here really is to try and produce a specialised acute provision for people who find access to mainstream services very challenging for whatever reason. And this is mainly for people with learning disability and autism. In the South West region as a whole, we currently have about 70% of that population receiving care in facilities outside the South West, and so therefore, with support from NHS England, an amount of money was allocated to the South West region, and the decision was made to split that to support two units, one in the north of the patch and one in the south. And the one in the south of the patch, the proposal is that we would host that in Devon, and that is the business case for 10 beds, 10-bedded unit here in Devon. which the proposal is to have that at Langdon Hospital just outside Dawlish, so that the approximately 10 people from Devon who currently are receiving their care outside the region can hopefully come back into Devon, and that we are able then to develop a rather more innovative both environmental and clinical support offer for those individuals to support them back into the most appropriate setting for them, and also to give us an opportunity to work upstream using some of those innovative, particularly service and care models, to try and support people better and hopefully avoid the need for long-term residential care in the future. So the detail is all in the paper. As I say, in principle outline form, this is a proposal that colleagues on the board have heard before, and as Kevin and Bill will know, we took this through the Finance Committee recently as well.
Thank you. I'm keen to bring Kevin Orford in here. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for that summary of the case. As you say, Nigel, the Finance Committee supported the approval of the scheme, but there were just a few financial elements which we wanted to bring to the attention of the board when it's considering its approval today. The first is that we did say that we perhaps needed further assurance that the capital cost of the scheme would come in within the allocated capital amount. We did receive some assurances around that, but we just wanted the board to note that obviously if we start this and it doesn't come in within that budget, then that has an impact on our own capital availability across Devon. We also noted and wanted the board to be aware that within the business case there are double running costs for 2 years of the scheme, which amount to £1.6 million, 800,000 per year. And we haven't fully identified where the source of the cover of that finance will come from, but we were giving assurances that there are potential funding sources to address this, and we didn't feel that that should hold up the approval of the case. And then the third thing to point out is that the scheme viability does currently rely on Devon having no out-of-area provision in this specialty by 26-27, and there's clearly some risk to that. We felt that the risk inherent in that could probably be mitigated by any empty beds being taken up on a spot purchase basis by other ICB areas. So those were the points that we wanted the board to be aware of, but we did support the scheme and recommend it to the board.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Would anyone else like to come in? Joe, did you want to come in on this item at all?
Apologies, I think you're running early. Sorry about that.
It's very unusual for us. So,
no problem, no problem. So I think hopefully Kevin's just given an overview of the Finance Committee conversation, so hopefully not too much more to add. That was just going to be one of the points that I was going to raise, was that obviously it has been there. The other thing I'll say as well, since we were here last time as well, we've also spoken to all of the overview and scrutiny chairs or portfolio holders in each of the local authorities as well, just to make sure we're having those conversations, linking up those conversations, both about the pathways but also about further engagement with the population as well. And then the only thing just wanted to say is, so obviously there are two recommendations on here. One is to support obviously the business case that's in front of you and the revenue consequences for us as an ICB, which Kevin has covered. And then the other one is as well the recommendation to provide a letter of support for the provider as well, because it will be the provider who will put the business case into NHS England. But that's it, so probably not much more to add.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for everything that you and your team have done to put this together. So, can I ask, are there any further questions that people have? I know we've already discussed this at a previous board, so can I ask that, do we have approval for the commissioning and financial consequences of the inpatient beds? Thank you very much. So, and I think, and support for the two items that Joe has just alluded to. Thank you. Thank you very much. Lovely. So we're now going to come on to the committee chair's report for the Primary Care Commissioning and Transition Committee. And so I'm going to hand over to Judy Hargaden. Thank you, Judy.
Well, I think I can help.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Judy? And the report is very detailed, so thank you very much for that. No, well, we are ahead of ourselves very unusually. We would normally at this point take a break, but I am very conscious that Kevin has to step out. And so I was going to propose that we actually, rather than take a break right now, that we come to the section on enhancing productivity and value for money. And we have a finance report and then Kevin's committee report, and that will allow us to be finished in time. So can I ask if, and then we'll come back to Hisham Khalil's report. So I'm going to ask if we could go to item 18 and the finance reports. And thank you very much, Bill Shields, for leading on this.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll assume that everyone has read the finance reports, both for the ICB and the integrated care system. What you will see in those reports is that NHS Devon at this point in time has a very small adverse variance to plan at the end of month 2, and that is something I think that we should be cautiously optimistic about. To remind board members, we have a very challenging financial plan this year, so there is a requirement for each of the individual organisations and the ICB to deliver around £150 million of cost reduction. At the end of month 2, we are well on track with that requirement, and that marks a significant change from the position that we saw at the same time last year, and indeed through the course of the last financial year. In addition to that, there is a requirement for us to deliver just over £60 million of savings as a system. And again, we are well on track with the delivery of, or the identification rather, of those savings. So at this point in time, we've identified over £30 million of savings, which have been through a rigorous process where we have developed in the first instance project initiation documents, and then secondly we've also developed plans on a page which goes into more detail in each of those, that identifies the risks, also ensures that the plans that we're looking at can be delivered, identifies the resources, and very clear about the senior responsible ownership of each of those work streams and how they will be delivered. All of this is overseen by the Finance and Planning Board, which is chaired by Sarah Brampton, the CFO at UHP, and that then feeds into the System Recovery Board, which is chaired by myself and which has representation from all of the chief executives across the system, and also non-executive representation, including Kevin and Steve Kirby, the Finance Committee Chair from RDUH. So at this point in time, we've identified over half of those savings. We also have detail in terms of project initiation documents for the remainder, and we are doing additional work to be really clear about how we deliver those. Two areas where we have some concern and will be doing further work to ensure that we have the appropriate assurance are on workforce, where there has been a bit of a delay in terms of the workforce savings that we're looking at, but we now are in a position where we should start to move at pace. We have identified an external consultancy who will support consultant job planning in at least 3 of the organisations across the NHS in Devon, and we're looking to extend that to 2 more organisations. And in terms of new models of care, which is a significant work stream, and with £13 million of savings attached in year, there is a workshop being run next Tuesday, which will include extensive membership and representation across the system. So from a digital perspective, from a workforce perspective, from an operational perspective, from a medical and nursing perspective, we'll have widespread representation at this workshop. The plan for that workshop is that we'll identify and get assurance about the savings in this year, and then from that be really clear about how the savings in each of the years flow from those things that we can do that are tactical in nature, which will not require consultation and should be relatively, and I stress relatively, straightforward to deliver, all the way through to the structural changes which may be required in terms of new models of care, and that will then link into any public consultation issues and also into the new hospital programme. So those plans that we've got in the system for 3 new hospitals, how can they help us facilitate changes, that required changes in new models of care? We'll also in that workshop ensure that there's appropriate discussion and representation both from primary care and social care, conscious of the fact that some of the changes that we can make in those areas will help us to deliver some of the upstream savings that we require in secondary care, and the same is the case for community services. So that's the second strand in terms of the £60 million. The third element in terms of our financial position is what does the bottom right-hand corner look like? So it's all very well saying that we're delivering cost improvements. It's all very well saying that we have a detailed plan for the delivery of system-wide savings. But if organisations are overspending, then all of that is for naught. At the end of month 2 across the system, we had a modest adverse variance from plan, which was under £300,000. All of that was caused by industrial action. So we had a negative variance in UHP, which was the result of industrial action, and we actually had positive variances to plan in Torbay and South Devon, and each of the other organisations reporting a break-even position. So again, that gives us some room, I think, for cautious optimism. Clearly, we have not seen the Q1 position, although my expectation is at the end of Q1 we will continue to be broadly on track with the plan that we've developed. The key thing for us going forward, as I've said at previous meetings, is how we then turn those plans at a system level into deliverable schemes. And the Finance and Performance Committee and the System Recovery Board, as well as in discussion with Region, has approved a second tranche of support to get us through the next phase of work. And the key thing in doing that will be to focus on deliverables. So as I've said, we've done a lot of work, and I think that work can be commended in terms of the identification, well, in the first instance, understanding the size and scale of the problem that we have. Secondly, to put together the plans that we need to have to tackle that. Thirdly, from that, to ensure that the governance arrangements are in place. But the key thing, and the area where the rubber will hit the road, is how we deliver against those. And so our focus in this next 3-month period will be almost entirely on delivery and how we make sure that from the start of October this year, so as we move into the second half of the year, we are fully focused on delivery. We are delivering at a run rate of £10 million per month, which is what we need to do to improve the financial position, and then we're in a much better position going into the next financial year, with the full year effect of that being significantly greater, between £120 and £180 million of savings. At that point, I'm happy to take any questions or to clarify any points that board members may have.
Thank you so much, Bill. I'm going to come first to Tandy Hara.
Yeah, I don't know about you. You can do the caution. I think I'll do the more optimistic take. I think we haven't had this kind of positive report on the finances since I've been here. So I think that I'll be more than just cautious. But small question: does any of this get impacted by the expenses we need to do because of the restructuring and stuff, or is that completely separate?
So there's the impact of the savings that will come from the ICB restructure would improve the financial position, or would be part of would contribute to that.
Even in the short term, as in
yeah, but what hasn't been clarified yet is that the running cost adjustment changes in the Secretary of State's letter. It made it clear that those would be fed back into direct patient care. What it doesn't say, and where there hasn't been any clarification, is that at a local level or is that at a national level? So we haven't assumed that we will continue to get the benefit of that locally. But in terms of our restructure, we're not just focusing on administration costs, we're also looking at some of the programmes of work. So we've got a piece of work to look at how the DRSS works, how we can improve some of the workflow within the DRSS, and because that's within our programme spend, that would contribute to the cost improvement programme. So that's one area where we're very confident that we'll see changes there and that they will improve both the way in which we run that service, because it is, although it's effective, it's very traditional. And one thing that we haven't done, for example, is to harness the power of digital in terms of AI and RPA. That's just not the way it's run. It's a very traditional call centre type model. We're very clear that there are savings that can come out from that. In terms of the cost of change there, and because we're very dependent on agency staff and staff on fixed-term contracts, the redundancy consequences there would be relatively small. So there's an example of something that would benefit. On the administration side, we're not making any assumptions that that will help. And also, because of the redundancy consequences for the ICB core admin element, it would probably offset any savings in the short term. Next year, we would see a benefit going forward, we hope, and that's still got to be clarified.
Okay. Thank you for that good report.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Judy Hargaden next.
Thank you very much, and glad to hear the progress with the savings is going well. I want to ask a question about the future. I'm wondering when we could have a chance to have a discussion about how we want to use our resources going forward, so that instead of always taking what they spent last year and planning to make them take a certain percentage out, whoever they may be, including us, it would be really good to begin to say, if I may use silly figures, we have £200 a year. We would like, as a system, I'm not just talking about just us, to use it on the following things and begin to move towards the notion of a distribution of resources across the different areas we have to work on, rather than just based on an adjustment to last year. Is it possible? I know we've got to get all the savings targets done and everything, but is it possible to have some kind of dialogue like that in, say, September, October, so that for next year we've got two figures in mind, what you spent last year and what proportion of our budget we think ought to be spent on X area of work?
So the plan has always been to get the system into balance, or as close to balance as we can in the first instance. And most, if not all, of our activities are focused on doing that. Board members will be aware that there is also an ongoing debate about equity and fair shares across Devon in terms of how that plays out on a locality basis. But also, some of the work that we've just done will show, when this comes to a private board session, that there are some inequities in terms of where resources are allocated if you look at this on a programme basis. So if we look on, for example, something that's analogous to programme budgeting, some of that comes up with interesting areas. So our mental health spend, for example, in Devon is significantly higher than any peer group across any of the other ICBs, which is quite unexpected. And it's higher to the tune of £60 million. And that's based on the fact that the Mental Health Investment Standard has required us to continue to invest in mental health, regardless of what the relative position is. So we will, at the appropriate time, bring an equity paper to a private session of the board. And what I'm saying to forewarn board members is that some of the things that are contained in that, when we actually look at the data and look at what the comparators are compared with other systems, might not be what we expected, and that might mean that the debate that we have will be very different from what we anticipated. Indeed.
Thank you. And building on that point, and mindful of the publication of the Hewitt report recommendations, that we start to look to shifting more towards population health and prevention, could that discussion also include how we're going to move towards that goal? Because I think it's an issue that's really important to system partners. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be built into our planning process. So, and it will need to be done on a sort of a multi-year horizon, because it might be that, you know, we just are setting this, I suppose, the direction of travel, again going back to the need for that stabilisation in the here and now this year and possibly the year after. But the intention is that we start to look at essentially our profile of commissioning intentions and or resource allocations, which as Bill says, then we then, as you say, because if you think about prevention, that's often in the out of hospital envelope. So it's being clear about what we mean by that, but actually also some of those decisions that we will need to make.
I mean, just building on that theme, one of the issues that we've got as an ICB and as a system is the requirement to exit SOF or NOF4. So the requirement to do that, and our plan is to do that by the end of Q1 in 24-25. And I think that one of the debates really is about how we do that and what that means in terms of our focus in the short term. And then beyond that, how do we pivot as an organisation to start to look at the other things which are clearly important? So the other objectives for the ICB in terms of health inequalities, population health, those things that are more difficult for us to focus on in the short term because we need to be in a position where we're not subject to regulatory action and can do the things that we know we need to do to serve the population as best as we can.
Thank you. Judy, you would like to come back?
I absolutely understand that, Bill, and I think we all should understand that getting out of NOF4, as it's now called, goodness me with the acronyms, is really important. But, and Sarah, in my question, I was picking up the point you raised. I do think we should also have a view about where we want to be if we were spending the money the way we would like to, as opposed to this constant need to say to people who are overspending in terms of our current view of allocations that you've got to take a bit off, you've got to take a bit off. And if we had done that separate exercise, and I really like what Bill said, that he's going to come to us with some more information about comparisons with other places, that's going to be really helpful. We ought to be doing a both and, so that we're able to, I have noted somewhere later in the, there's a small thing that people need to do and everybody says they haven't got the money to do it. But actually,
it's my plea, and I know I've said it before, but to constantly remind us all that there are odd pots of money that float around in different ways, shapes and forms that come up. And please, can we think, how can we use those in the best way to actually start thinking about prevention? And even if we start thinking about prevention of escalation as one of the points.
Thank you, Sarah Lou. Do you want to come back on that at all, Bill? No, I think it was a comment. Thank you.
No, I take the comments on board. I mean, I think that, like I say, it's important that we actually sit down with the report on equity and fair shares in the first instance. I think that'll be quite revealing. The report that'll be coming back, I think, is a very clear report. I would say that the one that was presented last October, I think, was very, very complicated. This one's very clear, and it is clear in terms of the issues that we've got, because one of the other issues to bear in mind related to fair shares and equity is that we are significantly over target as an ICB to the tune of about £130 million. That means that through the convergence process, we will lose £30 million per annum. And that needs to be taken into account in terms of balancing those different systems. So the notion that there will be additional resources going into one area versus another, I think, is not actually what will happen. Do you mean that areas are closer to that target? And again, that's something I think that we need to understand and debate so that there's full recognition of what that looks like.
Thank you very much. Could I ask one question as well? Because one thing that I do notice that we've had as a real problem within our Devon system in the past is that we haven't made recurrent savings. The balance has been too much towards non-recurrent. Are you confident that we've really turned that around?
So there was actually a discussion about this precise issue at the System Recovery Board this week, and in terms of the savings plan that we've got for this year, it's predominantly recurrent versus non-recurrent. So we're looking at something that's in the 90s in terms of that split. That is the plan as opposed to the delivery. So, there's still a lot that has to be done, but we are moving in the right direction, I believe, in terms of moving away from largely non-recurring savings to recurrent. Having said that, in the plan that we submitted to NHS England, and that was signed off with conditions, we were always clear that to get to the £42 million deficit plan, the ICB would have to deploy contingency and use non-recurrent funds. So this year, our £42 million deficit, should we achieve it, will be non-recurrent. The challenge is how we move through the delivery of those significant savings programmes to move into a lower deficit for next year, the plan being £30 million, and then exit in the third year of our recovery plan in a recurrent break-even run rate. So that's the plan in terms of how that fits in with the timeline.
Thank you. That's a very significant change for us as a system. So thank you very much, Bill, to you and your whole team. Right, I'd like to come now to item 19, which is Kevin Orford. Thank you very much for leading on this, Kevin.
Thank you. I've got nothing to add to the report, but I thought I'd just say a couple of things just based on the conversation we've just had at the board. Really, I mean, first of all, just to echo what Bill said, you know, we do have a more confident financial reporting this year. It does make the job of the Finance and Performance Committee a lot easier than a year ago. It does feel very different. We're getting a lot of assurance from the reports from the System Recovery Board, which I think is operating really effectively. And the same confidence we ought to also say on the IQPR and the performance reporting that we're getting at the committee as well, which has moved on in leaps and bounds over the last few months. So we're able to have different conversations, I think, than we were a year ago. And just on the, you know, the conversation, this does mean, because we've got this confident reporting and we are looking ahead, that the conversations that Judy and Sarah Lou are encouraging us to have later this year, that we can actually have them probably later this year. A year ago, we wouldn't have been able to get into any of that at all. So I think that also for me is a sign of the progress that's been made over the last 6 to 9 months. So having said that, you can see from the report what we covered at the last Finance Committee. Most of it, I think, has been covered in Bill's report and Anthony's report, but I'm happy to take any other questions if anyone has any.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Does anyone have any specific questions? No? Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I'm going to propose that we take a 5-minute break and that we meet back here just after 12:30, if colleagues are happy with that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. Shall we make a start? And for our next item, we come to item number 17, which is the committee chair's report for the Quality and Patient Experience Committee. And thank you very much again, Hisham, for joining us. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much, Chair. So I presume, of course, that colleagues will have read the report. There are just 2 or 3 very brief things that I wanted to highlight, that the committee members continue to focus on the development of the best quality indicators that we would be using as part of the Quality and Patient Experience Committee. These quality indicators will be sensitive enough to detect variance, and they will be action linked, so that the actions related to those quality indicators will have owners, so that we could monitor progress and provide assurance both to the committee and to the ICB as well. In that same area, we also discussed the important remit of the committee of monitoring quality of patient care and patient experience in relation to the impact of the operational plan and the NOF4 and the non-NOF4 criteria. So we will be focusing on that area as well. We have started reviewing the risks allocated to the committee, and as part of our work plan, we will have a plan that addresses the 19 risks allocated to the committee on a regular basis, so that we don't miss one of those risks that stays for a long time without review. The committee would just like to highlight to the board something that we'd like to escalate just for information for members, which is the new requirement for training in relation to patients with learning disabilities, and that this new training is a requirement that I believe all members of the ICB have to complete as well. So we thought that we would highlight this to the committee. And I'd also like to highlight to the committee that we have admitted as part of our core membership Tansy O'Hara, who's the chair of the People's Committee and a non-executive member. And we welcome her joining us and the breadth of experience she will provide, particularly in areas of patients' experience, but also ranging from other areas that she contributes very successfully to. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Hisham. Does anybody have any questions or comments to feedback to Hisham? No. Well, thank you very much indeed, Hisham, for your detailed report. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to come next to the committee chair's report for the People and Culture Committee, and this is led by Tandy Hara. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I don't think I've got a lot to add to that. I take that as read. Just sort of noting that we are focusing on trying to make progress on those things that we think will make a difference in terms of the workforce planning, as well as making a difference to how workforce is being recruited under the One Devon Bank. However, I thought that we might actually want to, instead of sort of talking about the report, which is quite clear, I thought we might want to have a chat around the latest national workforce planning that has just come out a couple of weeks ago. And I think, Paul, you did do a very good summary of what you think and how that's related to what we're doing. And I think you'd be pleased to know that much of what we've planned in our own workforce strategy is already reflected in that. So I think we sort of working a little bit ahead of that in that sense. But I think, Paul, you might want to make some comments on that. And I think that report will come back to the committee when we meet next for a proper look. But I thought today we might just want to update people.
Yeah, thank you. So we obviously signed off the Devon workforce strategy in May, and ours is a health and social care strategy, and the NHS plan that was published last Friday is purely focused on health. So I'm really pleased to say that we've got something that spans the whole of our system, not just a particular part of it. And as I said in the note, there's nothing in the national plan that hasn't been included in our strategy, and we're well on with most of the actions that are in there, not all, but most, which is a good start. And for me, the really key issue is us getting agreement pretty quickly, and it starts on Tuesday, as Bill talked about, in terms of the new ways of working, which is around getting an agreement, you know, ultimately from clinicians and the providers around how are we can deliver our services differently. You know, we can't have a workforce plan that's based on how we currently do things, because we know we can't find people and we can't afford them, even if we could. And the interesting thing in the workforce plan, the national one, is that whilst we are going to see growth in some staff groups, so I think the headline numbers are about 3%, 2.5% to 3% growth, there's also a demand that we make at least 2% efficiency savings. And just crudely, those two things add together to then get us to a place where we can cope with about 4.5% increase in population demand. So the numbers in Devon will be different, and I guess our productivity request is going to be, or demand is going to be bigger than that. But, you know, we can't just keep thinking we'll add more people to a system that's overspending, and, like I said, we can't find the people in the first place. So, you know, I think the big sort of demand that we need to make is that we do get on quickly and get system partners and ourselves to agree how are we going to transform our services and deliver things in a different way. Once we do that, we can then make sure there's a workforce plan to deliver the sorts of people that we need to deliver those services. So in the paper it describes that we've got a series of events over the next few months which will get us to a stage where hopefully by about November we've got a detailed workforce plan that describes where we expect to see increases in particular parts of the workforce, and therefore we need a proper recruitment and also learning and education plan to deliver those new sorts of folk, but also being really clear about where we're going to see some decreases. You know, we can't just keep adding to the workforce, because that's what's happened over the last few years. And, you know, we've talked a lot about the interface between health and social care. We've got a meeting on the 18th of July to start that discussion about, you know, what is it that perhaps our health colleagues do at the moment, and we've talked about wound care quite a lot, but what is it that they're doing in the community that actually colleagues in social care can and should be doing, particularly with the aid of technology that didn't exist a few years ago. So I think there's a huge opportunity there to make those social care roles more fulfilling and potentially allow us to pay them a bit more money, and therefore you start to get that virtuous circle. So a big emphasis in the next few months on creating a detailed workforce plan that we then have a learning and education strategy to help deliver. In the pack, we've also referenced the fact that we're now about to open a careers hub in Plymouth and then roll that out across, or that concept across Devon over the next sort of 6 or 9 months, and that's very much part of our sort of grow our own strategy. And again, we've also managed to find some investment from the region to enable us to do the kind of Live Well pilot that we did a while ago, where we were focused on people who weren't in work and getting them into work, particularly in social care. So that pilot, as you remember, was successful. We got 70 people into work who weren't working at that particular point in time, and 5 of whom had never worked before, which is just brilliant. We've now got some funding from the region that we need to spend wisely to then scale that project up across the system. And we've got a target of recruiting about 350 to 400 people in the next 12 months who aren't currently in work. So we can't keep relying on our fabulous international recruitment work. So we've just welcomed our 1,000th nurse into the system, which is great, but our strategy is to start to win ourselves off that, and that, again, that's consistent with what the national plan also says. You know, those colleagues bring a fabulous set of skills and diversity to our system and our population, but that's not a long-term sustainable plan. I'll pause there for any questions, particularly on the NHS plan and our own plan.
Thank you so much, Paul, for the work that you and your team have done on this. I know Nigel's keen to come in, as is Judy Hargaden and Lou. And, right, so Lou.
So
So one of the things that I mentioned to the team who were developing this a number of years ago is what about the citizen as an important member of the workforce? Because self-management, particularly for long-term conditions, is something that is well within our reach today. And with the advent of wearable technology, is going to only increase in the future. And so I applaud and absolutely support all of the things that you've said. But actually, I think we can be much more ambitious with the people of Devon, and it picks up on what Lou said, actually. You know, what we're doing for ourselves and for those near and dear to us, using and harnessing some of those new technologies. Because as Bill said, you know, the challenge that we face is absolutely extraordinary, and we need to absolutely use all the opportunities to transform. And for me, that's one of the areas that I think that we really need to explore.
Thank you. And Tandy, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, no, I think you can respond to that. I was just going to pass it back to Sarah Lou, because she's got a point on the workforce as well. But
I completely agree. I mean, the only thing I would add is that some of the stuff that's out there that we don't use isn't that new. You know, the stuff that's been out there that other systems have been using for many years to prevent falls, for example. And it's really now pretty low cost. So we do need a real focus. You know, often we talk about digital in terms of having an EPR, which is brilliant. I don't think we're focused enough on some of the tech that is wearable, that's quick and cheap to now implement. And that will save us a lot of time, money, and make our patients and our population a lot safer quickly.
And I think on the workforce and growing our own, I think we're going to really try our very best on that particular one, understanding that we've probably hit the ceiling on how many people we can bring in from outside of the system, but also actually that part of this is retaining, and that if we need to retain people here, we really need to improve the experience of working in Devon, and this might be one of those things that we can do much, much better and give people a reason to stay in Devon once they've come here. But I think, Sarah Lou, you had some comments about the experience of some staff in Devon and what can be done about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tandy. So I had an unfortunate experience to need a paramedic at the weekend and see some doctors over the weekend and on Monday. And I was really sad because strategically, I think we're absolutely doing the right thing, and I think we've got some great ideas, and we talked about the system. You know, we are saying the right things, and we're moving in the right direction. But what we're not doing is valuing them as human beings. And I've talked about this before about our staff's well-being and genuinely looking after them as partners in this system. And if we don't look after them once we've got them, then we're going to lose them. And one of the things that the paramedics said to me is that they join the paramedics, and I might have this wrong because I wasn't exactly compass mentis all the time, but that they come in at band 4, and within 2 years they get to go to band 6, might be band 5 to band 7, whatever. But after that, they're tending to leave the service. And it's not about money, because actually they get more money in the service that they're doing, but it's about cuts and in their breaks. So their breaks have been cut again. So how can we think about them as human beings? They're expected to go beyond their hours, and then that's not taken account of when they go on to their next shift. So my challenge back is to start thinking of our staff as human beings, and that they have their own lives to lead. The other thing that came up, and I promised I would raise it for this doctor, is that there's been some changes in car parking here. So if you, and I don't know the full details, but if you live within 2 miles, then you can no longer park on site. So if that's the case, 2 miles is a long way to expect doctors to work, to walk to work or to cycle to work if it's not something they're used to doing. So again, you know, he's telling me that doctors are leaving. They're leaving because they're not able to actually park at their place of work. So how can we really think about this as human beings doing their jobs? How can we support them to do that and to keep them and to look after them?
Thank you. I'm going to take 3 comments and then have a response to them at the end, because I know Hisham's been waiting to come in online, and also Judy would like to come in. So I'll come to Hisham next and then Judy. Hisham.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd just like to thank Paul for his excellent report and his take on how this applies to Devon. The first thing is, because it has, the strategy has multiple strands to it, my question to Paul, how are we going to monitor progress, and where there are areas of less progress or where things stall, how are we as a system going to intervene? Do we have a plan for that? Because it includes areas ranging from international medical healthcare professionals or international healthcare professionals all the way to retention of staff, as colleagues have just been referring to terms and conditions, which are really important. And I think we all agree that it's not usually a situation with salaries, but it's about terms and conditions. So how are we going to monitor all of that? And also about career progression. The second bit relates to a specific group, which are those who come from overseas to contribute to our healthcare system. And these could be nurses, midwives, any other type of healthcare professionals, as well as doctors. They all tend to need a prolonged induction period. And we know that that is an issue, at least for doctors, I know that. So I just wanted to highlight those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Hisham. I'm going to bring Judy in and then come back to Paul.
I wanted to build on Sarah Lou's point, but it actually links to what Hisham says too. And a comment I sent back to Paul when he sent us this was, what are we doing about retention? And what are we, these kind of examples are making people just want to give up. The job is hard. We had a long conversation at the Quality Committee about what it's like to be a junior doctor in our system nowadays. And I wonder, Paul, if you could, with your fellow HR directors, get some feedback for us about whether we're putting sufficient effort into people management skills at all levels of supervision in our system, so that people are not leaving for negative reasons. If somebody leaves for career progression, fair enough, but if they're leaving because they're demotivated, undervalued, dislocated in terms of the way their work is going, that's a waste of our resources.
Thank you. It just, obviously it takes years to train clinicians. It takes 5 minutes to lose them. So I think, did you want to come back on that? Or, yeah.
I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that it has been and will continue to be exceptionally difficult in terms of frontline pressure. So, I mean, the business about treating colleagues as human beings, I mean, we've got thousands of managers and leaders who do that on a day-to-day basis, and are we going to sit here and say that everyone's really happy? I think we wouldn't be able to say that because of the pretty unrelenting pressure that our colleagues are facing. And I've worked in an ambulance service, and I know things like breaks are really emotive things that are important to get right. But I guess the tension is when you've got a 999 call come in, there's a balance, isn't there, from an emergency operations centre point of view in terms of looking after colleagues, stroke looking after the patient that's having, we've collaborated with the ambulance service, for example, and shone a light on a load of careers that the typical paramedic wouldn't think would be suitable for them. So with not a lot of training, you can get a paramedic to become an ODP in theatres with not a great deal of extra training. Hospitals are always crying out for ODPs in theatres, for example. So, can we do anything about the break situation, etc., particularly at this level? No, that's got to be something for individual providers to sort out, but it's really tough. What we can and will be doing is more around those career paths to make sure that people aren't leaving because they're thinking, gosh, I've got another 10 years of driving around with blue lights on as a paramedic, for example. And, nursing is the same. And again, I think there is a piece of work, particularly with the ambulance service, where there are some non-obvious roles that a nurse, for example, could be doing in the emergency operations centres in terms of clinical oversight that a lot won't be aware are potentially available for them. So for me, the whole retention thing is around career paths, and we've now got in place, because of some national funding, some legacy mentors, initially particularly aimed at nursing, where actually those people, their role is to spend time with colleagues exploring what the future could well look like, as well as allowing them to sort of keep reasonably sane on a day-to-day basis. As you know, we've managed to find a way of keeping our system-wide wellbeing hub working this year that's well liked and well valued and well used. In the autumn, we'll be bringing a business case together around the fact that if we want to continue that, we'll need to self-invest in future years. But keeping the here and now going with enough support and intervention is hugely important. So hopefully that answers your questions. In terms of HISHAMs, in terms of monitoring, we've got a whole load of governance to do that. So we've now got a fortnightly productivity and efficiency group that specifically looks at the workforce metrics and how we're doing around things like agency spend, premium spend, etc. We've got a executive workforce group that's chaired by myself, system partners from both social care and health and primary care, and their job is to keep on top of our people plan delivery, and pretty much everything you see in the long-term workforce plan sits within our people plan anyway, give or take. So we have scrutiny as far as that's concerned, and that then feeds through to the People and Culture Committee. So you'll be getting as a board a regular update as to progress around those 23 to 25 key areas. Judy, to your point around leadership, all I can say is yes, I agree. People tend to leave their bosses rather than leave their organisations, and there is more work to do in that retention space to enable leaders to lead in a way that does put their people right at the very forefront of their mind. It's very easy to be attending to today's problems, but actually unless we look after our workforce, we'll have bigger problems going forward. So no easy solution there, but it's something that we are well aware of, and yes, we can pick up on your request to get views from the CPOs as to how well that's landing and being done within our providers.
Thank you very much. I know that Frank O'Kelly would like to come in, and also Nigel Aitchison. So, Frank, I'd like to
Thank you.
First.
I mean, this is, for me, is a really, really important issue. I've been working on the front line since 1987. It's never been as hard as it is at the moment. And it's hard not because of the patients, but because the system doesn't function properly. So their frustrations are taken out on the people on the front line, day in, day out. Yeah. So we are a caring organisation. We have to care for the carers as a priority. And if we don't get that right, we will continue to lose lots of them. In terms of people coming in from abroad to fill jobs, I mean, it's been great and I welcome them, but I think we have a moral obligation to stop that. I've got a doctor who comes back to us every year from Kenya, who's running a hospital out there and is losing their nurses to the UK. He's effectively running a 300-bed hospital, and he comes back to England to get reaccredited as a GP every summer. So we definitely have a moral obligation to grow our own. But if we don't retain the people we have and treat them as people and treat them humanely, we're going to have huge problems. And I have to say, some of what we're being asked to do is driving the problems. So the efficiency savings, it's efficient from a systems point of view, but from a people point of view, it puts more and more pressure on them. So the question about, do you send out an ambulance or take someone off to 999 call or take someone off their break, is because there aren't enough people to deliver the service and the demand that's there. So, we really, really have to make the job pleasant and doable. That's why people are leaving primary care, because they walk out every day feeling they've done a bad job because there's too much pressure on them.
Thank you, Frank. I'm keen to bring Nigel in, and then I'm very conscious that this is an area that we need to bring back to the board at a future board and follow up. But Nigel, going to...
So thanks, Paul. Some of what you said, I think, may be related to what I'm about to say. There was some work that Devon County Council did about a year or so ago, trying to build a career structure in social care for those colleagues so that they had a career path to follow. And it was just, I wondered if that work had continued and was part of this.
It's definitely part of that. I mean, the thing I was going to say is that, and this goes back to the kind of ways of working, you know, I bet you the vast majority of colleagues go home at night and think, I've been really busy today. I could have been enabled to do my job differently had it been for better technology or less. You know, we make it difficult in today's world for people to work really effectively and efficiently. And some of the issue about productivity lands badly because, you know, we talk about productivity and people feel that we're basically saying they're not working hard enough, which is, you know, couldn't be further from the truth. But, you know, there are examples out there in other systems whereby, you know, they're not bringing the ambulance service in to help somebody because actually they've got the voluntary sector or they've got social care people that can go in and have eyes on and, you know, take some of the very basic observations before the paramedics come out. So I think generally speaking, you know, particularly in that area, we're not using our skilled people and at the top of their licence. There's still quite a bit of early intervention that other colleagues can and should be doing. You will never find enough paramedics if we carry on doing what we do in the same way. And I honestly think, you know, properly embracing technology, particularly around things like falls, is something that we must get on and do quickly because it's cheap, but more importantly, it stops the person from having the fall in the first place. And I think until we can crack that, we're going to be in this constant, you know, people are too busy because we're placing demands upon them to work in a way that is reasonably old-fashioned.
Thank you very much. If there are no other comments or questions, I think what we're now going to do is move on to the action log, which is item 21 on the agenda. There's a number of items that we just need to quickly run through. The first one, action 26, was the Devon Audit Chairs Forum, which was going to hold a risk review workshop and feedback to the board. Do we have any update on that, Graham?
We did hold a meeting a few weeks ago, and that was discussed, and we've got a forward plan to work on that, so it's in the works, yeah.
So it's in progress.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Yep. We were going to include a send update on the board forward planner for review, and that was added to the forward planner to be brought back to the board in October. Is that still where we are?
What we've got to do with a number of these is look through the dates that have been scheduled, because obviously we've moved to a 2-month public meeting, so we're revamping the forward plan and we'll bring that back to you to look through.
Thank you. So I think that will apply to a number of the actions on here, probably for the accountability framework as well, and the development session that we held in April, item 36, to cover the advisory committee on the resource allocation formula. Again, I guess that would be something that we'll go through. So if I could just assure members of the board that I will go through this and we'll make sure we bring an updated action planner which takes into account the new timetable of boards. But there is one item on here that I know that there's some considerable interest in, so I'm just going to bring this one up, and that was having an update on the pathways, the orthopaedic pathways, and I think, Anthony, you had committed that you would come back and update us.
Indeed, thank you very much, Chair. I don't want to get into specific details about the individual case, obviously, because I think there is some confidentiality issues there. Suffice to say, we have looked at the pathway, and there were a number of lessons to be learned. Firstly, in terms of the referral route back into the service, which I think we have now corrected, but I think most notably is around the information being given to patients about where they sit on the pathway, and also how to contact and get support if they find themselves in the situation that was described. I think one of the things it does highlight is perhaps some degree of inequity in the previous pathways, depending on where you were referred in Devon and actually what the receiving centre was. And what we're trying to do at the moment is use the work that we're doing in terms of the elective pathway for orthopaedics and enhancing that to make sure there is equity of information across that whole pathway. I'd like to be able to say that actually that is progressing and it is actually very much part of the work we're doing, and also then communicating that work to the referring agents, i.e. our primary care colleagues, about how they access it and the support for both patients and for them as well, because I have obviously heard a number of concerns about that. I'll be communicating that out to primary care colleagues so that they are fully aware. And also, in terms of the case that was highlighted here, there is a separate investigation from the provider of the service, which in this case was Torbay.
Thank you for that summary. Judy Hargaden.
Thank you very much. You just mentioned you were going to communicate something out to primary care. May I just alert you to the fact that we have been working for some time now, and somebody in our committee said the speed is glacial on this, on an interface agreement between primary care and secondary care. It pops up in different places. We've had different versions of it, but perhaps I could just make sure you're briefed on that. In fact, I hope you are briefed already, but just writing out to primary care without writing to secondary care might be not the wisest move. The issues about the interface between the referrer and the recipient of referral are quite complex in our system at the moment.
Absolutely, and that's fully acknowledged. I think part of the work that we have been trying to do with orthopaedics in particular is to streamline the pathway and actually make it much more of a common pathway across all areas within Devon. And I think we've seen the testament of that in terms of our reduction in waiting times. The bit for me, though, is making sure there is equity of information. Yeah. And even though referring sources may be different and actually going through different routes, making sure that people fully understand what their points of contact are.
Thank you. Could I just draw out a point that relates back to the work that Paul Renshaw and his team are doing around allowing people to be working to the very top of their licence? Are we satisfied that within these pathways we're using the skills that we have in physiotherapy and other parts of the service to the maximum? We're not sort of forcing, if we're not sort of but we're using their skills to the maximum, I think.
We are now, put it like that. And I think there was obviously an issue in terms of referral for this particular individual. That has been corrected.
Thank you. And I hope that will apply to all our pathways, that we're looking at how we use everyone to the top of their licence. Thank you. Does anyone have any other points that they would like to bring out? No. Thank you very much. So then we come to the questions from the members of the public, and I understand we have no questions submitted. And we come then to any other business. Does anyone have any other business that they would like to raise? Thank you. Well, thank you again, colleagues, everyone, for coming today. I'd just like to mention as well my thanks to Graham Clark, who's acted as our internal observer for these meetings. So we'll be looking forward to your feedback later as well. So I think what we will do is we'll now take a break, and we'll come back at, what time are we? 1:45. At 1:45, yes. Thank you very much.